Lost of you, change your city. Lost of you, change your city.
Welcome back to the Live Your City podcast. We're talking trash. We've learned that recycling is not so much a problem, but plastic is an issue. Previously, we heard from Jane Patton of No Waste Louisiana that zero waste is essential for the future of any city. But it's not just good for business, it's good for residents too. In a city like New Orleans, it's known for its trash, it's known for its waste. How can we turn this around, and why should we? New Orleans & Company is talking today, the brand arm of New Orleans, about how we are trying to market the city as a sustainable destination and, more importantly, a sustainable home. We're meeting with the Vice President of External Affairs and Membership for New Orleans & Company, Kevin Ferguson. Kevin, thanks so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. And as always, we bring multiple hosts from the Life City team to host our podcast. So we've got Jordan. How you doing, Jordan?
I'm great.
And my name's Liz. I'm the CEO of Life City. We're just excited to talk trash.
Yes.
Kevin, tell us about you. Tell us about who you are and just what you do at New Orleans & Company.
Yeah, happy to share. So my background, I grew up here in New Orleans. My family is not from here, so at times, even though I grew up here, I felt a little bit like an outsider. So my dad was in the Navy. He was from New York City, and my mom was from South Carolina, so I'm a huge Mets fan. Let's go Mets. But growing up in a city like New Orleans where so many people are multi-generational and they have cousins and aunts all over the place, it was a little different being part of just a nuclear family. So it was me, my dad, my mom, my two older sisters, and my older brother. And then on top of that, especially once he retired from the Navy, we moved from Belle Chase to Algiers and got a little bit more into the city. There was this other thing of not being Catholic. That was a little weird because it's such a big Catholic community here.
How dare you?
I know. And I fixed that part, actually converted around the time I got married to Catholicism, so I'm part of that club now. But so we were always part of the city, but always felt a little outside. And then went away for college, moved back, worked professionally for years with the Saints and Pelicans in sales. And during that time, got a little bit more involved in our community, participating extensively with Young Leadership Council, volunteering, leading the board. And then in the last year, conversations kind of came up with position opportunities with New Orleans & Company. And I was really intrigued talking with Walt Leger, who's our incoming president and CEO, about the opportunities to lead this external affairs team, really engaging in a lot of the issues that are facing our city. He's got this great philosophy that I subscribe to, that the same things that are impactful for our city and make our city better also make it better for visitors, right? 90+% of that stuff intersects. And so that kind of what brought me to New Orleans & Company. I knew my next opportunity, I really wanted to be focused on something that could involve civic engagement and helping New Orleans be a better place. The organization plays such a big role in our city and in promoting our city. But there's folks, I think, internally, and this is one of the focuses we have in my department, is how do we make sure we educate our community about what we do and the importance of the tourism and hospitality industry overall. So we are what's known as a destination marketing organization. These exist throughout the country. Almost every major city you go to that has high level of visitorship or tourism has an organization working to market that city to other places, to say, hey, come here, host your meetings, conferences, conventions here. If you just want to travel for leisure, this is a great destination. So that's what our organization does. There is a large focus on bringing professional meetings, conferences, and conventions to the city. Those really fill up hotel rooms. They spend on a higher dollar amount than your leisure traveler, but all of that's important. So it's all part of the same fabric. And we market both for individual leisure travels, for group tourism, so think about weddings, family reunions, international tourism, and then also specifically for large events, conferences, and conventions. So, and then every conference or convention you can think of, whether it's in the convention center itself or it's in a hotel property in their meeting space, we're involved in that. And then we also partner with Great New Orleans Sports Foundation and other entities on larger events like the Final Four, Super Bowl, things like that.
Awesome. Wow. We always like to talk a little bit about, where people came from and their past, and do you have a historic story that kind of epitomizes the character of New Orleans?
Yeah, I was thinking about that, and there's a lot, right? And I think one of the things I enjoy most about New Orleans is that it's such a communal place, and we have some of these big anchor events that kind of bring the city together. You think about Jazz Fest, you think about Mardi Gras, these times where we're all kind of together. And I think there's a cool thing that happens in cities when you're kind of forced to be in close proximity to people, that you kind of work out things at a communal level, at a community level, without it having to go beyond that. My dad was from New York, and I think about like the subway, right? And you're always in these close proximity, and people kind of have these codes they abide by to make it work. And we're kind of like that, throughout the year, but it's really spurred by these big events. And Mardi Gras is one of my favorite times of year. I loved it as a kid, obviously. I love it now as an adult. I ride in a crew in Toth. But Jazz Fest is probably my favorite time of year. The caliber of folks that are in town for music and culture, it's just different than you get at other times. People are still having a good time and partying, but it's just a little, it's folks that appreciate good music, and they're really trying to explore the culture more. And I remember as a kid, again, my family's not from here. My mom's from South Carolina, my dad's from New York, so crawfish were not something in their existence before they moved here. But they raised, 4 kids down here for the majority of their life. And we were at Jazz Fest, and I don't know how the conversation started, but this man had a tray of crawfish, and he was like, "Hey, would your boys want some?" And she's like, "Oh, they've never had it, and I don't know how to peel it." And so this guy just taught us how to eat crawfish. He peeled one for us and then showed us how to peel it. And I remember that vividly, and it just reminds me so much about what our city is when it's at its best, right? It's an opening place. It's welcome to everybody. It's people looking out for their neighbors. It's people, being in an event and seeing kids and trying to share what they have. And that's the beauty of New Orleans, and that's the community. And that's a big part of the reason I moved back here after I got out of college. I just miss that. I miss being around my people.
Yeah, there's like an amazing thing that happens when you get food and you sit around a table.
Mm-hmm.
And, when you're at a crawfish table, it's a particularly communal event. Yeah. And a festival is really like a bigger table.
Yeah.
With like more people, just, no matter what your class, your race, your religious identification, like everyone's equal and dancing in the streets of Mardi Gras. And that is a beautiful thing where we can really, truly build that sense of community. I've never been in another city that feels like home from I think those experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We also tend to have that vibe. I would say every weekend you can go somewhere and find a pretty communal vibe, like whether it be Frenchman or whether it be just your community, hangout spot. It's definitely different than any city that I've been to.
Yeah, that's a big part of what we try to support, right? There's all these events that are happening constantly, and I thought we had a lot of things going on when I was younger, and now, being back here older and looking at the calendar, we've got a great calendar on our website that maintains events. You really get a sense of all the things that are constantly happening. Great causes, great organizations putting it on, and it's really exciting. And there's so much actually during the summer months now, too. Even though it's hot and we all go out there and sweat together and hang out together, it's fun to see that that doesn't stop. Because it's year round, which is great.
Just grab a snowball and you're good.
Yes.
Yeah, we have great ways of cooling off.
Yeah, lots of snowballs.
Awesome. You may not historically have thought of New Orleans and Company, the marketing arm of the city, which I really appreciate that you've explained. You're often behind the scenes, helping recruit for these festivals, helping make these festivals happen, helping market these events in the city, bringing people to the city. And you said 2 things that I think are really important. One is that what's good for residents is good for visitors, and that residents really is a priority into how you market the city and think about the city. And, the other thing that you mentioned that was interesting was just that events actually spend more. So from a business standpoint, the work that you're doing has a more, a greater impact than any of the other kind of tourism work happening in one way or another. I wouldn't want to say that, but it's important.
Yeah, it's all part of the fabric, right? So we need both. We need the business traveler and those folks to come here, the conferences and conventions. We always talk about every convention's like a mini ecosystem. So on top of being a marketing organization, we're also a 1,200 member organization. So everything you can imagine, obviously hotels, restaurants, but printers, florists, linen services, everything that's needed to make an event happen, those folks benefit from membership. So we talk a lot about economic development in the city and the need for that, but conferences and conventions serve as these little mini economic development summits every week, and then the turnaround happens the next week. It's a different group in town filling the hotel rooms, but they have a lot of the same needs. They still need those essential services that anybody that's traveling for a conference or convention is going to need. And that kind of benefits everybody, and our members definitely benefit from it directly. And the other point, just about, thinking about the parallels between what's good for residents, what's good for visitors. I think what people crave, especially when they travel now, are authentic experiences, right? And like, what is it like to be a local somewhere? And so if it's lousy being a local somewhere, why would you want to visit there, right? And, so that's one of the things where we have a wide range, especially with my team, with external affairs and our community engagement, to really get involved in a lot of the same issues that our residents, look, we're all residents here, we all live here. So the same things that I look at as a resident, I try to think about from my visitor hat, right? And if I were seeing this city for the first time or for a second time, would I notice those things? How would that impact me? Would that make me more or less likely to come back, right? And look, there's an understanding that there are things that every major city in the country has challenges, right? When we talk about public safety, we talk about trash, litter, we talk about homelessness and unhoused. Those are challenges that are going on across the country. But what we want to do is be impactful and do what we can to make sure that New Orleans is doing its part to address some of those problems.
I think, that kind of touches on a lot of like smaller conversations that can stem off of that, because obviously, people come here, everyone has their own experience and their own opinion, but with New Orleans and Company being the face of how people may see New Orleans outside of the state and or the city, I grew up in Texas, so I come from my family. Everybody comes here to visit. I lived in California for a little bit. There's just a lot of places that I've lived, and I have friends and people who come visit who always talk about, New Orleans, and they will gladly share with how they think of it or what they see or experience when they're here. So I'm curious as to like with the Zero Waste Challenge, and Liz can tell us more about that. Why is New Orleans and Company really trying to be a part of that? And what is like the goal for being a part of that workshop?
Yeah. Jordan, that may be a record for the longest time it's taken somebody from Texas to mention that they're from Texas in a conversation. So congrats on that.
Yeah. Well, I was born here, but I have to slide it in.
Yes. So our interest in the Zero Waste Challenge, we're excited about it. Again, we're a 1,200 member organization. We are constantly looking for ways to highlight the positive things that our members are doing. And it's really interesting. I think the genesis of a lot of this conversation was from some work that was going on at the Convention Center. Convention Center is a close partner of our organization. We work together with them to book events. And they've really taken the lead as an entity in the city in trying to be more sustainable, more green, really reducing waste. And so we had some conversations with their director of sustainability, Linda Bainham, and she talked about, hey, if you're looking to do something, you should talk to Life City, you should talk to Liz Shepard, and we were happy to do that. I think what I kind of think about, some of this is a little nebulous, but I just recently turned 40. I think about my childhood. I think about growing up and things like Captain Planet, right, and recycling coming and all these great things, and we were going to change the world, from a grassroots level. And those things are great, but the reality is that businesses and corporate leadership have a larger role to play, I think, in a lot of these initiatives than just individuals. And I'm not trying to discourage anybody from recycling. We all need to recycle at our homes too. But when you think about the impact of a large business or company or an industry and saying, hey, you know what? We want to be at the forefront of sustainability. We want to be at the forefront of waste reduction. We want to be at the forefront of reducing our carbon footprint or whatever positive initiative may be. That has a lot of power. That has a bigger impact. And that's where we need to head. I think one of the things we look at and are realizing from a travel perspective, what we refer to as our clients are these conferences and conventions and associations that are looking to come to New Orleans that we're trying to attract to New Orleans. And what we're seeing more and more is that there are things from a corporate social responsibility level, from a value level that are important to them, right? And so when they're looking at cities and entities, they're saying, hey, we're looking at 4 or 5 different cities. These are things that are important to us. How are those things being impacted or worked on in your city? Please, let us know what you're doing so we can kind of bring that to our members as we think about where we want to host our meeting and bring our people to. And the more you look at that, sustainability, green infrastructure, being supportive of these initiatives are things that are important to more and more people. And there's a laundry list of them, right? But this is one that we're seeing well. And, I think from a leadership standpoint, we look at our industry and we say, hey, this is an opportunity we have, to be at the forefront of something and not at the back of it as an industry, as a city. So what can we do as an industry that we know is a leader in the city to be involved in these things? So for us, having conversations with Liz and Life City, zero waste seemed like a really great place to start, right? Like so many of these concepts people have heard about before, composting, recycling, these aren't new things, right? And, it's interesting when you talk to some of our members, when you talk to staff and employees, a lot of people are already doing these things, so now it's just, how do we apply that at the level of a business?
That's such a great way to like think about it, because we were talking earlier, we've talked to a couple people we've talked to Glass Half Full, who does recycling with glass, and we're going to talk to Schmelly's, who does composting at these higher levels. And we were talking about how as individuals, we really want to make a difference, but it's so hard when you go somewhere and they just give you a plastic cup, or, you go somewhere and you have to walk out and throw away trash. But if I went to the convention center and they had recycling and they had glass recycling, and it was just something I knew I could see was actually happening, that would make so much sense. And, I think it makes it way more appealing, especially to know that clients are now asking, what are you doing, to be more sustainable?
Yeah, and I'll say this too. I think, when you think about where folks come from, there's a standard they get used to. I think that's one of the things that's great about travel. You get exposed to so much, and so if you spend time in bigger cities or cities that profile like us, there's things you notice, and you're like, I wish we had that back home. Or hey, I'm glad we have that too, right? And I had this conversation with the Blue Bikes, where that's a thing where I remember going to Austin and seeing like shared bikes and people riding around, and it's like, we need that in New Orleans, right? Because those are cities that we look at and we say, hey, that's on our level. Those are our sister cities. Those are the cities that in so many ways we aspire to be like. How do we bring those innovations and technologies back here? And I think there's more will for it now. It's the way we think about things. I remember, I don't know if it was you and I talking, Liz, or maybe I was talking to, I had a conversation with Andrea Chin recently when we were talking about that, and she talked about flying into, maybe it was Toronto's airport, and they had a whole cubicle promoting, minority-owned businesses that did consumer packaged goods. It's just like, how cool would it be to have something like that there, right? And that's the power of travel. You get connected, you see ideas, you see what other people are doing well, and you want to bring that back home. And so I think another part of that with what we do, people are coming from other places where these things exist, right? Where, recycling is ubiquitous and where composting is everywhere, and they come here and they want to have that too. They don't want to come here and be like, I had a great time in New Orleans, but it was wild. I couldn't recycle my goods. Everything I got wasn't sustainable. And I'm just happy to be back home, right? Like, that's not the experience we want. We want people to think, hey, the caliber of life and the things you have back where you're from, you can have that here too. That can be a part of your experience here too. And it's not like you cross some invisible border when you get on that plane and all of a sudden you're back in the 1980s or something like that.
Yeah, in some ways people come here and it's like going back in time.
Yeah.
That's a constant thing. Yeah. Like, that's not in our heads. That's not, oh, does it happen? Oh, we recycle one or two places. That's like across the board.
Yep.
We are not leading in that, but how are we going to lead in that?
And I was in San Diego recently, and it was funny because we were getting our rental car, and I was just looking for a quick place to take my son to the bathroom, and there was a coffee shop, and I was like, I'll pop in here and grab a coffee. And they gave it to me in a glass jar, because that could be kept or recycled, or there's a lot you can do with it, right? And I think it cost $1 more, so maybe it was $4 instead of $3. And they put a little koozie on the outside, and I was like, man, this is pretty cool. And this is something that like we could do back home. Like, I think there's the will for it. I think it's just the right avenue and kind of presenting that idea. But things like that, where you just go other places and you see that there's a connectivity throughout the community about getting behind things like this. And so we're excited with Zero Waste to be able to bring that to our restaurants, our hotels, our other hospitality and tourism partners, to kind of expose them to different things they can do to reduce their waste.
And we're really grateful for your leadership and saying, hey, this is important, because the people who come here, the people we're talking to, are demanding it. It's not just the Captain Planet good for the earth thing. It's good business. It's the future. And especially younger generations are demanding this. We're seeing other cities like San Diego that are really leaders in it. And there's a lot I think we can learn from other cities, and that there's a lot of things that we could probably teach other cities too. Every city has like their strengths and challenges. What do you think is going to be our biggest challenge as we embark on this effort to try to change that tune, to try to change the culture here from, a place that is frankly full with a lot of litter to a place that really, has like waste bins on every corner that, for each waste stream, and where every business is recycling? What's going to be our biggest challenge in your mind as we embark on this together?
I think a lot of it is just informing people of what's out there, right? And so I think that's part of it. And I think step 2, especially from a business perspective, is making people believe that it's good business, right? That, hey, your consumers care about this. and that it's not something that's going to add a dramatic cost to you, right? Or that even that cost's worth it, right? Air conditioning and HVAC units cost a lot of money, but guess what? No one wants to hang out in New Orleans in a building that doesn't have AC, right? So there are things that we just take for granted that everybody's like, oh yeah, no, I have to have this, right? And so I think what we have to do is continue to position waste diversion, composting, recycling as things that are just part of doing business, right? And that if you want to be in our community and operating, these are things that people expect and that they can have. And that's what I'm excited about with the challenge and how we're kind of formatting that panel, is to really have representation from businesses of different sizes. To say, I don't want people to say, oh, well, look, the convention center's doing all that, but go look at their budget, they can afford that, right? Like, I think at every level of business, there's an opportunity to be more sustainable and to invest in this. And again, that's part of being a community, right? Is that there are things that we all agree upon that we need to have. And so I think we've got to change that mindset a little bit. I think so many people want to do the right thing. It's just giving them that little nudge or giving them a couple of easy steps they can take, and that's one of the things I think, we talked about the badges really, and designing what does it take to get a badge. Let's make some concrete steps and some recommendations that people can take when they leave this event or when they leave the website to say, hey, here are 2 things you can do right now to be more sustainable, to reduce your waste. And then I think from the bigger side, from the city side, and what is it going to take to get those things on every street corner? That's a bigger question. But I think it starts with the community again. So, this is where I think residents and businesses can come together and say, hey, these are things that we're doing, and now we need our city to step up and do the same. And I think they'll find a willing participant there. I think this is a city that is interested in being an innovative city and being a leader and being a city that can look around the country and say, especially for our set in the South, right? When you look to Texas and you look at Nashville and Memphis and all these cities in Austin that we kind of talk about constantly, it's important to us that we're doing things like they are and that we're kind of living up to a certain standard. And so I think the community as a whole, our residents and our businesses can come together and make sure that that's what the future looks like.
Mm-hmm. Are there other issues that you find customers demanding and asking about in terms of like business practices beyond recycling?
Oh, certainly. I think there's a number of things that have come up legislatively that folks have strong feelings about, and one of the things we try to do is really encourage people that the best way that you can really get out there and advocate for your position is to be here, so skipping New Orleans or skipping another city that may be within a state that has some policies you don't like isn't really the way to advocate for your position. Like being here on the ground, engaging with locals, engaging with those groups that are important to you and showing your support by being here, I think is a lot more valuable than tuning out, and it's a challenging thing for people to really think about and address. But when you look at the history of our society, right, like anything that you look back on over the last 100 years, that has been a challenge for people to overcome. What has made a difference is people interacting and people being there. There's a great story that somebody shared when I first started with the company. There was a lot recently done at a state level to really work on some of those decisions that impacted segregation and Homer versus Plessy and all those things. And that initiative started because folks were at a conference here. And they were talking, and one of the guys was talking to a descendant of Homer Plessy, and they were going through all that. And that's how they kind of started the ball rolling and making some of those changes. And so there's a power when people come together, and we know that. So I think the worst thing we can do as a society is to say, well, these are places that will come together and these are places we won't. What we really need is that greater engagement. Come here, come understand how inclusive a city New Orleans really is, right? Because I think when you look around the country, people are more free to be themselves here than anywhere else. And that's something that's really appealing. We talk about it from a visitorship. And, our current CEO, Stephen Perry, was talking about it. And he was like, the beauty of New Orleans is wherever you come from, you can kind of unzip and let your soul out and really just refresh and recharge before you have to go back to where you came from, right? And we know that about this place, and we're trying to message that more, that this is a place where you can really recharge and be yourself. And I think that's what so many people really love about New Orleans. They come here and they have these incredible experiences, right? And then they go back and they feel refreshed. And so that's a powerful thing, and we want to make sure that everybody feels that when they come here.
Yeah, and I think you talked about a number of really interesting things that that all kind of go around this idea of like people, changing, and there being a whole bunch of change that's happening in New Orleans. Starting with something like the Blue Bikes. Obviously I went to Texas State, so I was right outside of Austin, and I remember seeing that come here, and I was so like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. Like, I cannot believe that I've never seen it before, But I think it's interesting too to not, think, okay, we're gonna walk out tomorrow and be in this like utopia of everything's changed like that. But starting step by step, and also, like you said, taking it from big businesses to like mid-sized businesses, and I think residents themselves try to do their part. And so seeing it come from a standpoint of people who can make such a substantial change, especially with people coming into New Orleans, because people aren't going to stop coming here, well, who knows, if there's,
Let's hope not. No.
Let's hope not. Every time I work on the weekend somewhere else, and I get to see a lot of people, and it's right by the convention center. So I get to see all of these people come in, and they're always like, we love coming to New Orleans. Like, they have so much fun. They love it. But creating that morale, especially because they are coming from places that are probably practicing things that we want to incorporate. But so like with the Zero Waste Challenge, with the Zero Waste Workshop, all of these businesses are going to come together. Like, what's something they're going to talk about? Like, what could someone look forward to experiencing there?
I have a panel of speakers who can help give practical solutions for businesses of any size to start diverting their waste, from like donating food to signing up with Glass Half Full. They're going to reserve 10 spots for people at the workshop.
Oh, that's great.
So right there and then we can get 10 organizations to just sign up and start glass recycling. Information about what you should buy, because what you recycle starts with what you buy. And so we need to, as a state, really think about how do we compost, because we don't have to send that to China. We can do that right here, create soil, grow food here. It's obviously more nuanced than that, because compostables aren't exactly nutritious for soil. But the point is, we can compost them here. We don't need to depend on another country. We don't have to ship it away. We can take care of that. So for single-use items, so those kind of practical skills. And then, Kevin, what else do you hope to see from that?
I really want to connect our businesses with folks that can help them. One of the great things about my job is you get to do all this outreach, and you talk to different community organizations, nonprofits, and you realize all this work that's being done out there, right? Interestingly enough, around the same time we were having these conversations, friend Zach Monroe, I know you know Zach, had reached out about making some connections with the CRCL and their oyster shell recycling program, right? And it was just perfect timing. We had a chance to talk with them and learn about what they do. And I was like, oh, you know what? We've really been meaning to talk with you. We're working with Life City on this great program. We'd love for you to be involved. And they've had a lot of success with working with restaurants here. Obviously, there's a lot of seafood in New Orleans. We know that. And oyster shells are being used by recycling those to help rebuild reefs out in the wetlands and help to protect that area. And so it's kind of a no-brainer to kind of work with them and connect them with some of our restaurant partners. So that's the beauty. You kind of bring together people that are all in the same orbit, right? And it's like, I don't know that they've had a chance to have conversations with some of our members, so we're going to provide that. I think about composting and the glass recycling, same thing there. Just having people in the same room, that power of bringing people together to understand that some of the barriers they may see don't really exist, right? The idea of like, I don't know if we can do this because it costs this much. And it's like, hey, how about you actually go talk to them and see what you can work out? To hear from other people directly about how they've instituted these programs at their businesses. That's a powerful thing. I think I can't share enough how much business owners and leaders like to kind of talk to each other to get that affirmation of, hey, you can do this, right? Like it's a lot. Going out on your own and being the first one to do anything is really challenging. And that's not, the easiest thing to do. But when you hear, hey, there's 5 or 6 other organizations or businesses that profile like you that are the same size, have the same employees, and they're doing this, it provides a level of comfort to know, hey, you know what, we can do this. And so that's part of this for me, is like, we're going to have some aspirational conversations about where we want to go, but we're also going to have these really tight, tangible things where you can connect with other businesses to understand how you can get involved in this, and that it's not a big barrier to do this stuff and have an impact.
And I think, you said that people come to New Orleans because they can unzip their soul. They can unzip and their soul can come out. I love that. And I think that comes down to being authentic. I think we all desire to be authentic, and it's authenticity that leads to great relationships. And I think the reason why that oyster shell recycling program is so successful is that's our local, authentic community food. Glass Half Full, they're not just recycling glass, they're creating sand to pack on our local community coast. They're creating relationships with people. This isn't just about, a service or an exchange or a transaction. It's about transforming our community into being stronger, more resilient, and to just have better relationships all around. And I think historically, some of those concepts were in people's minds, but not being spoken. And I feel like at least we're eons away from living in a world full of equality, but, I think that, or equity, but I feel like at least we're having conversations. And if we don't have the conversation that are authentic, that are real, that then we're not going to get to a better place. And so, it's really, way more than a party. It's transforming a community.
And it's happening for New Orleans. Like, that's the biggest, thing I think that we could say, at least, here is like, all of these things are happening to better the community of New Orleans, to better everybody's like experience in New Orleans, not just people who come visit, but the residents that live here every day. In our podcast before, we talked to Jane, and she was saying, she lives here. We all live here. We don't want to have to pick up trash or have to deal with like result of excess trash, when there definitely are ways to go about recycling them and taking care of that. And Fran with Glass Half Full, she just said that they partner with one smaller dive bar, and with how much they've recycled, they could fill up 6 Bourbon Streets, and that's just
incredible.
That's crazy, right? It's a small bar, and like that's just, and it's possible. It's possible.
These college kids,
they're coming up different.
Well, I'll tell you that here's a great story about Glass Half Full. We've been recycling our glass there for a while, just my family. And I remember, I don't know how long ago, it was probably a year plus ago, I pulled up, and if you've been to the one out there on Louisa Street, there was kind of a big pothole, kind of divot in the parking lot. And I remember they were like, hey, be careful, because it was filled with water. They're like, that's a really deep hole. And I was like, oh, wow, thanks for like telling me. And I kind of parked right there, so I had to kind of navigate around it when I was getting my glass out. And then I went back probably a week ago, and it was full of the sand of the glass that they do. So it was their recycled glass that they kind of, really grind down into a sand-like texture that they use to fill that hole, right? And so it's one of these things where I think, the solutions for a lot of our problems are right there, right? And you can see a group like them that are kind of adding to that. So it's really cool to see. I think that's so much of what you see in the city are really bright, young, not always young, but bright entrepreneurs, innovators that are looking at ways that we can use what we have to fix some of the problems we have. And so it's exciting to see that. And I think that's a great organization, one of many. And that's the other idea with this is how do we help promote, this great work that's being done in the community.
And that's really what Love Your City is all about. How do we help local people, local organizations remember that all of us can be the solution for our communities?
Yeah.
We can all step up, be a leader. We can all step up, solve a problem. We can all step up and reach, put our hand out to help and partner with another organization that's doing good. And whether that be donating or starting a business or, investing in a Black-owned company, there's so much that each one of us can feel empowered to do. And especially now, I think more than ever, there's a lot of hope for change, even though I know there's a lot of scary things happening, and we just got through a pandemic. I think there's a ton of hope, and Kevin, you give us hope. So thank you for being such a strong partner in this community.
Well, thank you for that. I'm excited to partner with you guys. I'm excited for the work we're doing. Everybody's got to stay hopeful. This is our turn, is what I tell people. When you think about every generation has their challenges they're overcoming. I think we've had a lot. I think a lot, especially about the people that are getting out of college and recent grads. But keep trying. This is going to be our impact, how we come through this, how we come through the economic challenges, everything else that's going on. This is our opportunity to be impactful. So I'm excited to do my part, and I know New Orleans and Company is too.
Awesome.
Thanks so much, Kevin.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.